Bear cub was caught in a landslide of rolling boulders. What this baby did was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The mountain air carried whispers of spring as dawn broke over Pine Ridge Valley. Rays of golden sunlight spilled across the forest floor, warming the dew-kissed leaves and coaxing woodland creatures from their slumber. Among them was Willow, a mother black bear who emerged from her den with her 3-month-old cub, Oak. The little one tumbled playfully at her paws, his dark eyes wide with wonder at the world he was still discovering. Not far from the den, nestled at the edge of the valley where forest met meadow, stood a small wooden cabin. Inside, Lily Chen rocked her 10-month-old son, Noah, as morning light streamed through lace curtains. Noah's giggles filled the cozy space as his mother tickled his round belly. His curious eyes, the color of amber honey, seemed to take in everything around him with an unusual intensity for a child so young. "You're going to be an explorer one day, aren't you?" Lily whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. She placed him in his playpen surrounded by wooden toys handcrafted by his father, Marco, who had left at first light to check his traps and fishing lines, their main source of income in this remote corner of the wilderness. The Chen family had moved to Pine Ridge Valley just 6 months ago, seeking solace after Marco's father passed away, leaving them the cabin as part of his legacy. The transition from city life had been challenging, but Lily found peace in the rhythm of nature, in the distant calls of owls and the rustling of leaves. Noah, too, seemed to thrive in their new home, reaching developmental milestones earlier than expected. Outside, Willow guided Oak through patches of early spring berries, teaching him which ones were safe to eat. The cub bumbled along, occasionally distracted by butterflies or the scurrying of chipmunks. At one point, Oak spotted a monarch butterfly with vibrant orange wings and broke away from his mother's watchful gaze, chasing the dancing insect with clumsy enthusiasm. "Oak, stay close." Willow seemed to communicate with a gentle grunt, but the excitement of discovery pulled the cub farther away, toward a rocky slope that climbed the mountainside. The butterfly landed on a small boulder, its wings opening and closing in a hypnotic rhythm. Oak placed his paw on the rock, his small claws scraping against the rough surface. The butterfly took flight again, leading the curious cub higher up the unstable slope. Back at the cabin, Lily placed Noah down for his morning nap and stepped outside onto the porch, inhaling deeply. The mountain air filled her lungs, crisp and clean. She glanced at her watch. Marco wouldn't be back for hours yet, and she had promised to gather herbs for their evening meal. The herb garden was just a short walk from the cabin, near the edge of the meadow. "Just a quick trip," she murmured to herself, checking the baby monitor clipped to her belt. Noah was sleeping soundly, and she would only be gone for 15 minutes at most. Lily stepped off the porch, unaware that this ordinary spring morning was about to transform into something extraordinary. As she gathered sprigs of rosemary and thyme, a distant rumble echoed across the valley. Lily straightened, herbs clutched in her hand, and scanned the horizon. The sound came again, louder this time, a deep, ominous growl that seemed to emanate from the mountain itself. On the rocky slope, Oak had wandered dangerously far from his mother. The butterfly had disappeared, but the cub had found new fascination in a patch of wildflowers growing between the boulders. He pawed at them playfully, unaware of the tremor building beneath his feet. The earth gave a warning shudder, and several small rocks skittered down the slope. Willow sensed the danger before she heard it. A primal instinct caused the fur on her back to stand on end, and she let out a distressed call, searching frantically for her wandering cub. She spotted him halfway up the rocky slope just as the mountain released its fury. The landslide began with a few tumbling stones, then escalated into a cascade of boulders and debris. The sound was deafening, a roar of nature's raw power as rocks collided and earth shifted. Oak froze in terror, his small body trembling as the world seemed to collapse around him. He let out a desperate cry that echoed through the valley, a sound of pure fear that cut through the chaos. The rumble jolted Noah awake in his crib. His eyes flew open, and instead of crying out in fear, he became eerily still. His head tilted as if listening to something beyond the walls of the cabin. His tiny hands gripped the sides of his crib, and he pulled himself up to standing, gazing out the window toward the distant slope where dust now clouded the air. Lily dropped her basket of herbs, her heart racing as she watched the landslide in horror. The rumbling subsided, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Then, carried on the wind, came a sound that made her blood run cold, the frightened cry of an animal in distress. Without hesitation, she raced back to the cabin, bursting through the door to check on Noah. To her shock, he was standing in his crib, his eyes fixed on the window, his expression oddly alert. "It's okay, baby," she soothed, reaching to pick him up. But Noah squirmed in her arms, his gaze never leaving the window, his small body straining toward it as if drawn by an invisible force. His behavior was so unusual that Lily carried him to the window, hoping to calm him. "See? Mommy's here. Everything's—" Her words died on her lips as she spotted movement on the slope. Through the settling dust, she could make out the frantic figure of a mother bear, circling the edge of the landslide, periodically rising on her hind legs to peer over the fallen rocks. "Oh no," Lily whispered, realizing what had happened. The bear's cub must be trapped in the debris. Noah's hand stretched toward the window, fingers splayed against the glass. He made a soft sound, unlike anything Lily had heard from him before, a sound of yearning, of concern that seemed impossibly mature for a baby not yet a year old. As Lily watched, torn between compassion and the instinct to protect her child, she couldn't know that this moment marked the beginning of an extraordinary chain of events that would challenge everything she understood about the connection between humans and the natural world, about innocence and courage, and about the mysterious bond that sometimes forms between the most unlikely of creatures. In the aftermath of the landslide, as dust settled over Pine Ridge Valley and the cries of a trapped bear cub mingled with the worried whimpers of a human baby, the stage was set for a miracle that no one could have imagined. Least of all, Lily Chen, who stood at her cabin window, holding her son, watching a mother bear's desperate search for her child. The landslide had transformed the peaceful mountainside into a chaotic jumble of rock and earth. Willow paced frantically at the edge of the debris field, her powerful muscles tensing as she rose on her hind legs again and again, searching for any sign of her cub. She let out low, mournful calls that echoed across the valley, calls that were answered by faint whimpers from somewhere beneath the rubble. Oak was alive, but trapped. A fallen slab of rock had created a small pocket of space, protecting the cub from being crushed, but leaving him pinned and unable to escape. He pressed his small body against the cold stone, trembling with fear and pain. One of his paws was caught beneath a smaller rock, and every movement sent sharp jolts of agony through his tiny frame. His cries grew weaker as dust filled his lungs and fear sapped his strength. Inside the cabin, Noah became increasingly agitated. He squirmed in Lily's arms, making insistent sounds and pointing toward the window. Lily paced the room, trying to soothe him while her mind raced. She knew she should stay inside. A distressed mother bear was one of the most dangerous creatures in the forest. But the knowledge that a helpless cub was suffering just a few hundred yards from her home weighed heavily on her conscience. "I can't just do nothing," she murmured. But what could she do? Marco was miles away, and the nearest neighbor was an hour's drive down the mountain. She considered calling forest services, but in this remote area, help would take hours to arrive, hours the cub might not have. Noah's behavior grew stranger by the minute. He refused his bottle and kept turning his head toward the window, his amber eyes filled with what Lily could only describe as determination. When she placed him in his playpen to think, he immediately pulled himself up and began babbling urgently, rocking back and forth as if trying to propel himself toward the door. "Noah, please," Lily pleaded, her nerves fraying. "Mommy needs to think." Outside, Willow had begun digging at the edge of the landslide, her powerful claws sending dirt and smaller rocks flying. But the boulders were too large, the debris too densely packed. Each time she made progress, more dirt and stones would shift, threatening to further bury her cub. Her frustrated roars made Lily's hair stand on end. The afternoon sun beat down on the mountainside, turning the trapped cub's shelter into an oven. Oak's whimpers grew more desperate, a sound so pitiful it seemed to pierce the walls of the cabin and drive straight into Noah's heart. The baby's face scrunched up, not in a cry, but in what looked like concentration. He began rocking more vigorously in his playpen. Lily made a decision. She would approach the landslide, carefully, quietly, and assess if there was any way to help. She placed Noah in his crib, surrounded by his favorite toys. "Mommy will be right back, sweetheart. I promise." She kissed his forehead and secured the crib's side rail before grabbing a pair of gardening gloves and a shovel from the porch. The moment the door closed behind her, Noah's demeanor changed. The distress on his face transformed into resolve. He looked around his crib, then at the lowered rail on one side, the rail his mother had accidentally left unsecured in her haste. Noah had been pulling himself up and cruising along furniture for weeks now. But what he did next defied everything Lily thought she knew about her son's capabilities. With purposeful movements, he gripped the edge of the crib, pulled himself up, and swung one leg over the side. After a moment of precarious balancing, he tumbled to the floor with a soft thud. The fall should have made him cry out, but Noah remained eerily silent. He sat for a moment, orienting himself, then began to crawl with surprising speed toward the cabin door that Lily had left slightly ajar in her distracted state. Meanwhile, Lily approached the landslide with cautious steps, keeping one eye on the distressed mother bear, who was now pacing on the opposite side of the debris field. The bear seemed aware of Lily's presence but was too focused on her trapped cub to pay much attention to the human. Lily could hear the cub's weakening cries coming from somewhere near the center of the slide. She began carefully moving smaller rocks, her heart racing with every sound from the forest around her. The work was slow and dangerous. Any wrong move could shift the pile and further endanger the trapped animal. Back at the cabin, Noah had managed to push the door open wider and was now on the porch, his determination unwavering. The wooden steps presented a challenge, but the baby approached them with a focus that seemed impossible for his age. He turned onto his stomach and began backing down the first step, then the second, instinctively using a technique he had never been taught. Once on the ground, Noah paused, his head tilted as if listening for something. The cub's cries had grown fainter, but they still carried on the spring breeze. The baby's head turned toward the sound, and he began crawling across the yard, toward the path that led to the landslide. Lily had made little progress with her shovel. The boulders were too large, and she feared causing another slide. Sweat dripped down her face as she considered her options. The mother bear had disappeared into the trees, likely circling around to try another approach, and Lily used the opportunity to move closer to where she thought the cub was trapped. "Hello?" she called softly. "Little one, where are you?" A weak whimper answered her, seeming to come from beneath a large, flat rock that had come to rest against two boulders, creating a small triangular space underneath. Lily dropped to her knees and peered into the dark gap. Two frightened eyes gleamed back at her, reflecting the scant light that penetrated the cub's prison. "Oh, you poor thing," Lily whispered, her heart breaking at the sight of the trapped animal. The cub was clearly injured, its small body covered in dust and blood. One of its paws was pinned beneath a rock, and its breathing was labored. Lily knew she couldn't move the larger rocks by herself, but perhaps she could free the cub's paw and create a larger opening for it to crawl out. She was so focused on the trapped cub that she didn't notice the soft rustling behind her. She didn't see the small figure that emerged from the forest path, crawling with single-minded purpose toward the landslide. She didn't realize that Noah, her 10-month-old son, had somehow made his way from his crib to the scene of the disaster. It wasn't until she heard a soft, familiar coo that Lily's blood ran cold. She turned slowly, disbelieving, to see Noah sitting just 10 feet away, his small hands covered in dirt, his amber eyes fixed not on her, but on the gap where the bear cub lay trapped. "Noah," Lily's voice was a horrified whisper. "How did you—" Her question was cut short by a low, rumbling growl from the trees behind her son. Willow had returned, and now stood on the path, her massive form blocking any escape route back to the cabin. The mother bear's eyes darted from Lily to Noah to the spot where her cub was trapped, her intentions impossible to read. Lily froze, afraid that any sudden movement would trigger the bear's protective instincts. Noah, however, seemed oblivious to the danger. He continued to stare at the trapped cub, making soft cooing sounds as if trying to comfort it. In that moment, as sunlight filtered through the trees and 4 lives hung in precarious balance, time seemed to stand still. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as she faced an impossible choice: rush to protect her son and potentially provoke the mother bear, or remain still and hope that Willow recognized they meant no harm. What happened next would defy explanation and change their lives forever. The space between heartbeats stretched into eternity as Lily watched her baby sitting vulnerable and exposed, mere feet away from a protective mother bear. Every instinct screamed for her to snatch Noah to safety, but experience told her that sudden movements could trigger Willow's predatory response. So she remained frozen, her body coiled with tension, ready to spring into action if the bear made any aggressive move toward her son. Willow's dark eyes shifted between the humans, her nostrils flaring as she processed their scents. A low rumble emanated from her chest, not quite a growl, but a warning. She took one hesitant step forward, then another, her massive paws padding silently on the forest floor. Noah, in a display of either profound innocence or inexplicable wisdom, showed no fear. He remained seated, swaying slightly as all babies do, his attention alternating between the mother bear and the trapped cub. Then, to Lily's horror, he did something unthinkable. He smiled at Willow, a wide, gummy grin that transformed his entire face into an expression of pure joy. The bear paused, her head tilting slightly. "Noah," Lily whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't move, baby. Please don't move." But Noah had his own ideas. He turned away from the bear and began crawling, not toward Lily or away from danger, but directly toward the pile of rocks where Oak lay trapped. Lily bit back a scream, certain she was about to witness something too terrible to comprehend. Willow watched the baby's progress with wary eyes. When Noah reached the edge of the debris field, she let out a short, sharp bark that made Lily's heart skip a beat. But the sound wasn't directed at Noah. It seemed to be aimed at her cub, as if reassuring it that help was coming. Noah stopped at the small opening Lily had been investigating. He leaned forward, peering into the darkness, then made a series of soft babbling sounds. To Lily's astonishment, the trapped cub responded with a weak whimper. What happened next would later be described by Lily as the moment the world stopped making sense. Noah placed his small hands on the ground and pushed himself up to a standing position, something Lily had never seen him do without support. And then, with extraordinary coordination, he began to move some of the smaller rocks away from the opening. "Noah?" Lily whispered, disbelieving. The baby glanced back at her, his eyes reflecting a wisdom far beyond his months, then returned to his task with single-minded focus. His tiny fingers gripped stones that he should barely have been able to lift, clearing a path to the trapped cub. Willow approached cautiously, her massive form casting a shadow over the baby. Lily's hand tightened around the shovel handle, her only weapon if things went wrong. But the bear made no aggressive move. Instead, she lowered her nose to the ground near Noah, sniffing curiously at this small human who seemed intent on helping her child. Noah worked with inexplicable purpose, moving rocks that Lily would have thought beyond his strength. Occasionally, he would pause to peer into the gap, making soft, soothing sounds to the frightened cub. After several minutes of this impossible labor, the opening had widened considerably. Then came another shock. Noah lowered himself to his hands and knees and began crawling into the gap. "No!" Lily cried out, lunging forward only to freeze when Willow swung her massive head in her direction, teeth bared in warning. Noah disappeared into the darkness beneath the rocks. Lily could hear him babbling softly, the sounds echoing in the small space. Willow paced nervously, occasionally rising on her hind legs to see over the debris pile, but making no move to stop the baby's intervention. Minutes passed, the longest minutes of Lily's life. Then, impossibly, Noah emerged backward from the gap, and he wasn't alone. Clutched in his small arms, pressed against his chest, was Oak. The cub was covered in dust, one paw bleeding and held at an awkward angle, but unmistakably alive. Noah sat back, cradling the cub as if it were one of his stuffed toys, a look of solemn satisfaction on his dirt-streaked face. Willow let out a sound that was half roar, half cry of joy. She bounded forward, but stopped short of the children, her massive body quivering with restraint. Noah looked up at the mother bear without fear, then gently, so gently, placed Oak on the ground between them. The cub limped toward its mother on 3 legs, whimpering softly. Willow nuzzled her baby, licking the dust and blood from its fur, checking every inch for injuries. Satisfied that Oak would survive, she turned her attention back to Noah. Lily held her breath, the shovel half raised as the massive bear approached her son. Willow lowered her head until her nose almost touched Noah's face. The baby reached out with one small hand, and before Lily could cry out, placed his palm against the bear's muzzle in a gesture of perfect trust. For 3 heartbeats, child and bear regarded each other. Then Willow drew back, gave one last look at Lily, and gently collected her cub in her powerful jaws. With surprising delicacy, she carried Oak into the forest, disappearing among the trees as silently as she had appeared. Lily dropped the shovel and rushed to Noah, scooping him into her arms, her body shaking with delayed terror and overwhelming relief. She buried her face in his neck, breathing in his baby scent beneath the dust and sweat. "How did you—" she began, but the question died on her lips. How could she expect an answer from a baby who had only recently learned to say Mama and Dada? Noah rested his head on her shoulder, his small body suddenly heavy with exhaustion. His eyelids drooped as the adrenaline drained from his system. Whatever force had driven him to perform the impossible was receding, leaving behind just a tired baby who needed his mother. As Lily carried Noah back to the cabin, her mind struggled to process what she had witnessed. How had her baby escaped his crib? How had he found his way to the landslide? How had he known exactly what to do to save the trapped cub? None of it made sense. Yet she couldn't deny the evidence of her own eyes. Something extraordinary had happened on that mountainside, something that defied rational explanation. As the cabin came into view, Lily found herself wondering if she would ever understand the miracle she had witnessed, or if some mysteries were simply beyond human comprehension. What she did know was that her son was special in ways she was only beginning to discover, and somewhere in the forest, a mother bear and her cub were alive because of him. Night descended on Pine Ridge Valley, wrapping the cabin in a velvet darkness punctuated by stars that seemed close enough to touch. Inside, Lily sat in the rocking chair by Noah's crib, watching her son sleep peacefully after his extraordinary adventure. She had bathed him, tended to the small scrapes on his hands and knees, and fed him until his eyelids grew heavy. Now, as moonlight spilled through the window, she tried to make sense of the impossible events of the day. Marco had returned at dusk to find Lily in a state of nervous exhaustion. At first, she had hesitated to tell him what had happened, afraid he would think she had lost her mind, or, worse, that he would blame her for putting their son in danger. But the story had poured out of her. The landslide, the trapped cub, Noah's inexplicable journey, and even more inexplicable rescue. To her surprise, Marco had listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful rather than disbelieving. "My grandmother used to tell stories," he said finally, sitting beside her at the kitchen table. "In her village in Italy, they believed some children were born with old souls, souls that could speak to animals, that understood things beyond human knowledge. You can't possibly believe that Noah is—" "I don't know what to believe," Marco cut in gently, taking her hand. "But I know you, Lily. You're the most practical, level-headed person I've ever met. If you say this happened, then it happened. The question is, what does it mean?" Now, as she watched Noah sleep, Lily pondered that very question. What did it mean that her 10-month-old son had somehow known a bear cub was in trouble? That he had escaped his crib, made his way to the landslide, and somehow freed the trapped animal? That a mother bear had allowed him to touch her face without harming him? A soft tap at the window startled her from her thoughts. Lily went still, listening. The sound came again, distinct and deliberate. Not a branch brushing against the glass, but something purposeful. She rose slowly and approached the window, pulling back the curtain cautiously. What she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Standing in the moonlit yard, her massive form unmistakable even in shadow, was Willow. The mother bear was watching the cabin, her intelligent eyes reflecting the silver light. At her feet, Oak sat on his haunches, his injured paw now held close to his chest, but otherwise appearing alert and recovered from his ordeal. As Lily watched, frozen between fear and wonder, Willow rose on her hind legs and placed one massive paw against the ground. She repeated the gesture twice more, then dropped back to all fours. The message seemed clear. 3 taps, the same pattern Lily had heard at the window. "Marco," Lily called softly, not taking her eyes from the bears. "Marco, come here." Her husband appeared at her side, his hand automatically reaching for the rifle that hung above the door. But Lily placed her hand on his arm, stopping him. "Look," she whispered. Marco drew in a sharp breath as he took in the scene. "Dio mio," he murmured. "Is that—" "The mother and her cub," Lily confirmed. "The ones Noah saved." As they watched, Oak limped forward a few steps, then used his good paw to dig at something in the earth. After a moment, he backed away, revealing a small dark object on the ground. Willow nudged her cub gently, then turned and lumbered into the forest, Oak following closely behind. Within seconds, they had vanished among the trees. Marco and Lily stood in silence, both trying to process what they had witnessed. "Should we?" Marco began hesitantly. "Should we see what it left?" Lily hesitated, then nodded. "Stay with Noah." She slipped outside, the cool night air raising goosebumps on her arms. The yard was silent and still. No sign of the bears that had stood there moments before. Lily approached the spot where Oak had been digging, her flashlight beam darting nervously into the surrounding darkness. There, nestled in a small hollow in the earth, was a perfect round stone, smooth and black, with veins of white quartz running through it. Lily picked it up, surprised by its warmth in the cool night air. As she rolled it in her palm, the moonlight caught the quartz veins, making them shimmer like stars. She carried the stone back inside, showing it to Marco with a questioning look. "A gift?" he suggested, his voice hushed with awe. "Or a thank you?" The stone seemed to pulse with warmth in Lily's hand, as if it contained some inner light or life. She placed it on the windowsill above Noah's crib, where the moonlight made the quartz veins glow with an otherworldly radiance. "Whatever it is," she said softly, "I think it's meant for him." As if in response, Noah stirred in his sleep, his small lips curving into a smile, though his eyes remained closed. Lily and Marco exchanged a look of wonder and uncertainty. Their world had shifted today, expanded to include possibilities they had never before considered. Outside, a breeze rustled through the trees, carrying with it the distant sound of a mother bear calling to her cub. Inside the cabin, Noah slept peacefully beneath a stone that seemed to hold the light of the stars themselves, his dreams filled with mysteries only he could understand. Spring blossomed into summer across Pine Ridge Valley. Wildflowers painted the meadows in vivid swathes of color, and the forest canopy thickened with lush green leaves. In the Chen cabin, life had settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by the extraordinary events of that April afternoon. Lily had begun keeping a journal, documenting Noah's unusual behaviors and abilities. The entries painted a picture of a child developing far beyond normal milestones, yet in ways that defied standard evaluation. May 15th. Noah stood unassisted for 5 minutes today, watching a robin build its nest. When the bird dropped a twig, he seemed distressed until it retrieved the material. His empathy for animals continues to deepen. May 29th. Found Noah on the porch at dawn. Cribside was up and locked. No explanation for how he got out. He was watching deer in the meadow, completely calm. They approached within feet of him before sensing my presence and fleeing. June 10th. Noah spoke his first full sentence today. Fox hurt. Marco thought I was imagining things until we found an injured fox with its leg caught in another hunter's trap a quarter-mile from the cabin. Noah led us straight to it. The black stone with its veins of quartz remained on Noah's windowsill. Sometimes at night Lily would find it glowing with a faint pulsing light that faded if she approached too closely. She mentioned this phenomenon only once to Marco, who had stared at her with such concern that she never brought it up again. Some things she was learning were better accepted than explained. As for Willow and Oak, they had not returned to the cabin, but their presence was felt throughout the forest. Occasionally, Lily would find signs that the bears had passed nearby, distinctive tracks in soft earth, claw marks on trees that seemed to form patterns rather than random scratches. Once, after a heavy rain, she discovered a small shelter of branches arranged in a crude lean-to over Noah's favorite outdoor toys, protecting them from the downpour. Today, as July heat shimmered over the valley, Lily sat on the porch watching Noah play in the yard. At 16 months, he was walking confidently now, his sturdy legs carrying him on determined explorations of their property. Marco had built a low fence to keep him from wandering into the forest alone, though both parents harbored private doubts about its effectiveness given Noah's mysterious abilities. Noah was currently crouched beside a fallen log, his attention focused on something hidden from Lily's view. His face wore the expression of intense concentration that had become familiar. Brows furrowed, lips slightly parted, amber eyes narrowed in focus. "Noah," Lily called, rising from her chair. "What have you found, sweetheart?" The boy glanced up, then beckoned to her with an imperious wave of his small hand. Lily approached, curious. As she drew near, she saw that Noah was watching a procession of ants carrying bits of leaf and twig into a small opening in the log. Her son was carefully dropping breadcrumbs from his snack in their path, his head tilted to observe their reactions. "Helping," Noah said simply, looking up at her with solemn eyes. Lily's heart swelled with a complex mixture of emotions: love, wonder, and a touch of fear. Noah's compassion for all living things continued to astonish her, but it came with a growing awareness that her son experienced the world in ways she could not fully comprehend. A distant rumble of thunder interrupted her thoughts. Looking up, Lily saw dark clouds gathering over the mountains to the west. Another summer storm was approaching. She scooped Noah into her arms despite his protests. "Time to go in, little helper. The rain is coming." As they reached the porch, a flicker of movement at the forest's edge caught Lily's attention. She turned, shielding her eyes against the sun's last bright rays before the storm clouds obscured it. There, half hidden among the shadows of the trees, stood a figure that made Lily's breath catch. A young bear, nearly grown but still bearing the gangly proportions of adolescence, watched them from the tree line. Its right front paw bore a distinctive white marking, and it held the limb slightly raised, as if an old injury had never fully healed. "Oak," Lily whispered. At the sound of the name, Noah squirmed in her arms, pointing excitedly. "Bear friend! Bear friend!" Oak took a hesitant step forward, then another, emerging fully from the shadows. He was alone, no sign of Willow nearby. The young bear paused at the edge of the yard, dark eyes fixed on Noah with what Lily could only describe as recognition. Thunder rumbled again, closer this time. A gust of wind bent the tops of the pine trees, carrying the scent of approaching rain. Oak's head lifted, nostrils flaring as he tested the air. "Go home, little one," Lily called softly. "Find your mother. The storm is coming." As if understanding her words, Oak turned back toward the forest. But before disappearing among the trees, he rose on his hind legs and placed one paw against a pine trunk. Tap, tap, tap. The same three-beat rhythm Willow had made the night they had left the stone. Noah responded by patting Lily's shoulder in the identical pattern, a smile of pure joy lighting his face. Then Oak dropped to all fours and loped into the forest, vanishing as completely as if he had never been there at all. The first fat raindrops began to fall as Lily carried Noah inside, her mind racing with questions. What did it mean that Oak had returned alone? Had he come specifically to see Noah? And what was the significance of that three-tap gesture that both bears and her son seemed to understand? As the storm broke over the cabin, Lily placed Noah in his play area and went to close the windows. When she reached his bedroom, she noticed that the black stone on the windowsill was glowing brightly, pulsing with light in time to the crashes of thunder outside. This time, the light didn't fade when she approached. Instead, it seemed to intensify, casting strange, shifting shadows on the walls. Lily reached out hesitantly and touched the stone. A jolt of energy, not painful but startling, ran up her arm, and for a brief, disorienting moment, she felt as if she could sense every living creature in the forest around them. The birds huddled in their nests, the foxes in their dens, the deer sheltering beneath dense evergreens, and somewhere, moving with purpose through the downpour, a young bear making his way home. She snatched her hand back, heart pounding. The connection broke immediately, leaving her gasping for breath, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. "Mama, okay?" Noah's voice came from the doorway. He stood watching her, his expression concerned beyond his years. "Yes, baby," Lily managed, forcing a smile. "Mama's fine, just surprised." Noah nodded as if he understood perfectly, then crossed to the windowsill and placed his small hand on the glowing stone. Unlike Lily, he showed no shock or discomfort. Instead, a look of profound peace settled over his features. "Oak happy," Noah said simply, his hand remaining on the stone. "Oak, remember?" Lily watched in astonishment as her son communicated with the stone, as if it were a conduit to something, or someone, far away. After a moment, Noah removed his hand, and the stone's glow dimmed to a soft pulse that matched the rhythm of the falling rain. "What does Oak remember, sweetheart?" Lily asked, crouching beside her son. Noah turned those wise amber eyes to her face. "Remember me help. Remember dark place. Remember scared." His vocabulary was expanding daily, but still limited by his age, yet the gravity with which he spoke made each word feel heavy with significance. Lily wrapped her arms around Noah, holding him close as the storm raged outside. The mystery of her son deepened with each passing day, but so did her fierce determination to protect him and to understand the extraordinary connection he shared with the forest and its creatures. As lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the room in stark white light, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of something much larger than themselves, a threshold between the world as she had always known it, and something wild and ancient that called to her son from beyond the boundaries of ordinary understanding. August arrived with a heat wave that baked the valley and sent forest creatures seeking the cool shadows of the deepest woods. Marco had begun taking longer hunting trips, venturing farther into the mountains in search of game that had retreated from the scorching temperatures. These absences left Lily and Noah alone at the cabin for days at a time, strengthening the already powerful bond between mother and child. On one particularly stifling afternoon, Lily filled a small plastic pool with water and placed it in the shade of the porch for Noah to splash in. Her son had been unusually restless all day, pacing the fence line and staring into the forest with an intensity that made Lily nervous. "Come cool off, sweetheart," she called, wiping sweat from her own brow. "It's too hot to be running around." Noah reluctantly joined her on the porch but showed little interest in the water. He kept glancing toward the tree line, his small body tense with anticipation. "What is it, Noah?" Lily asked, following his gaze. "Do you see something out there?" "Coming," was all he said, pointing toward the forest. Lily squinted against the shimmering heat waves rising from the ground. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the dark wall of pines and the occasional flutter of birds seeking relief from the sun. Then a movement caught her eye. something large moving through the underbrush about 50 yards from the cabin. Her first thought was that Oak had returned, but as the figure emerged into a patch of sunlight, she realized it was too big to be the young bear. This was an adult, its massive shoulders rolling with each step, its fur a rich, dark brown rather than Oak's black. Lily's throat went dry. "Noah, come here," she said quietly, reaching for her son. But Noah was already scrambling down the porch steps, heading directly toward the approaching bear with no sign of fear. "Noah!" Lily cried, lunging after him. The bear stopped at the sound of her voice, its head lifting to stare in their direction. It was indeed an adult, but not Willow. This was a male, larger, with a broader face, and a distinctive patch of lighter fur on his chest. A male bear meant danger. They had no familial bond with the Chens, no reason to show the strange tolerance that Willow and Oak had demonstrated. Lily snatched Noah up just as he reached the bottom of the steps. "No, baby," she said firmly, her heart pounding. "That's not Oak or his mama. That's a different bear." Noah squirmed in her arms, pointing insistently. "Papa Bear," he said with absolute certainty. "Oak, Papa." Lily froze, her eyes darting back to the massive creature watching them from the edge of the yard. Could it be? Were they now being visited by the entire bear family? The male bear, if indeed it was Oak's father, made no move to approach them. He stood motionless, seemingly content to observe from a distance. After a tense minute, he lowered his head and began sniffing at the ground, moving in a deliberate pattern across the edge of the clearing. "What's he doing?" Lily murmured, more to herself than to Noah. "Looking," Noah replied seriously. "Looking for hurt." A chill ran down Lily's spine despite the heat. "What do you mean, hurt? Who's hurt?" Noah's face scrunched up in concentration, as if he were trying to explain a complex concept with his limited vocabulary. "Forest hurt," he said finally, "trees crying." Before Lily could process this cryptic statement, the male bear suddenly stiffened, his massive head swinging toward the western ridge. He rose on his hind legs, towering over the underbrush, and let out a deep, rumbling call that echoed across the valley. Then, without another glance at the Chens, he dropped to all fours and lumbered away, disappearing into the trees with surprising speed for a creature of his size. Lily carried Noah back to the porch, her unease growing. She had lived in these mountains long enough to know that animals often sensed danger before humans. Changes in air pressure that preceded storms, the subtle vibrations of seismic activity, or the distant scent of fire. Fire! The thought struck her with sudden, terrible clarity. They were in the third week of a drought. The forest floor a tinderbox of dry pine needles and fallen branches. A single spark could set the entire valley ablaze. Lily placed Noah in the plastic pool, hoping the water would keep him occupied, then hurried inside to the radio. Marco maintained an old CB radio for emergencies, connecting them to forest services and the small mountain communities scattered across the valley. She tuned to the emergency channel, her fingers clumsy with sudden fear. At first, she heard only static, but then a voice crackled through, the measured tones of the Forest Service dispatcher. "Repeat, fire reported on the western ridge. All residents of Sectors 7 and 9 advised to prepare for possible evacuation. Fire crews dispatched from County Station. Current containment 0%. Wind conditions unfavorable. Updates hourly." Sector 7. That was their area. Lily's stomach clenched as she ran back outside, scanning the horizon. From the porch, she could just see the western ridge, a jagged line of stone and pine against the cloudless blue sky. A faint haze hung over the distant peaks. Not storm clouds, but smoke. Noah was standing in the plastic pool, water dripping from his swimming trunks, his face solemn as he too gazed toward the ridge. "Fire coming?" he said quietly. "Yes, baby," Lily acknowledged, already mentally cataloging what they would need to pack if evacuation became necessary. Marco wasn't due back for 2 more days. If the fire spread quickly, she would have to handle this alone. As if reading her thoughts, Noah climbed out of the pool and padded into the cabin, leaving wet footprints on the wooden floor. Lily followed him to his room, where he went straight to the windowsill and picked up the black stone with its veins of quartz. "Need this," he said firmly, clutching it to his chest. "Of course, sweetheart. We'll take it with us if we have to leave." Lily began pulling clothes from his dresser, mentally preparing for the worst while hoping the fire would be contained before it reached them. Noah shook his head, his expression unusually stern for a toddler. "No leave, help coming." Lily paused, a small T-shirt in her hands. "Noah, if the fire gets too close, we have to go. It's not safe to stay." Her son regarded her with those unnervingly wise eyes. "Stone will help. Bear friends will help." Before Lily could respond, the CB radio crackled to life again. This time the voice was higher, more urgent. "Attention all personnel. Fire has jumped the containment line at Hawk Creek. Wind shifting eastward. Mandatory evacuation now in effect for sectors 7, 8, and 9. Repeat, mandatory evacuation." Lily dropped the shirt and rushed to grab the emergency bag they kept packed by the door, a habit Marco had insisted on when they first moved to the remote cabin. It contained basic supplies, important documents, first aid materials, and some food and water. Enough to get them safely to the evacuation center in the valley town 15 miles away. "Come on, Noah," she called, retrieving his car seat from the closet. "We need to go now." But Noah was nowhere to be seen. Panic surged through Lily's veins as she called his name, searching the small cabin. She found him on the porch, standing at the railing, still clutching the black stone. His face was lifted toward the forest, and his lips were moving in what appeared to be a silent communication. "Noah, we have to leave right now," Lily said firmly, reaching for him. He turned to her, his expression eerily calm. "Not yet, Mama. Wait." "We can't wait, baby. There's a fire coming." She tried to scoop him up, but he squirmed from her grasp with surprising strength. "Look," he insisted, pointing toward the forest edge. Lily followed his gaze, expecting to see flames or more smoke. Instead, she gasped at the sight that greeted her. At the tree line stood not one bear, but 3. The male they had seen earlier, Willow's unmistakable form, and between them, the smaller shape of Oak. They stood in a perfect line, watching the cabin with what could only be described as purpose. As Lily stared in disbelief, Willow rose on her hind legs and made the now familiar 3-tap gesture against a tree trunk. Oak followed suit, and then, after a moment's hesitation, so did the male. Noah responded by tapping the porch railing in the same rhythm, the black stone still clutched in his other hand. Then, to Lily's horror, he marched down the porch steps and began walking directly toward the bears. "Noah!" she cried, running after him. But before she could reach him, Noah stopped halfway across the yard. He placed the black stone on the ground, then took 3 deliberate steps backward. Willow approached the stone cautiously, sniffed it, then used her massive paw to push it into the dry earth, covering it completely. The moment the stone disappeared beneath the soil, a strange calm fell over the clearing. The wind, which had been gusting erratically, died away completely. The distant sounds of the forest, bird calls, the rustling of leaves, ceased as if the world were holding its breath. Noah turned to Lily, his face serene. "Safe now, Mama. Stone sleeps, fire stops." As if in response to his words, fat raindrops began to fall from what had, moments before, been a cloudless sky. The drops came faster, harder, soon becoming a deluge that drenched the parched earth. Steam rose from the ground as the cool rain hit the hot soil, creating a surreal mist that swirled around the yard. The bears watched for a moment longer, then, as one, turned and vanished into the forest just as the downpour intensified. The summer storm, appearing from nowhere on what had been a clear, hot day, raged for hours, soaking the valley and the surrounding mountains. That evening, the CB radio confirmed what Lily already knew somehow. The rain had extinguished the forest fire completely, saving Pine Ridge Valley from what fire officials were calling a potentially catastrophic event. No one could explain the sudden localized storm that had appeared precisely when and where it was needed most. No one except, perhaps, a toddler who spoke to bears, and a mysterious stone now buried in the Chen's front yard. Autumn came early to the mountains that year, painting the valley in rich golds and crimsons. The fire had been the last major event of the summer, leaving behind a small patch of blackened forest on the western ridge, but sparing the rest of the valley, including the Chen cabin. The mysterious rain had stopped as suddenly as it had started, ending precisely when the fire was extinguished. Marco had returned the day after the fire to find Lily and Noah safe, the cabin untouched, and his wife struggling to explain the inexplicable events of the previous day. To his credit, he had listened without interruption, his weathered face thoughtful rather than skeptical. "I've seen strange things in these mountains," he had said finally, watching Noah play with wooden blocks on the cabin floor. "My grandfather used to say that nature has its own ways of protecting itself, ways beyond human understanding." "This goes beyond strange weather, Marco," Lily had insisted. "The bears came to warn us. Noah knew exactly what was happening, and that stone—" She had trailed off, unable to articulate the connection she felt between the stone, her son, and the forest around them. Marco had simply nodded, neither confirming nor denying her interpretation of events. In the weeks that followed, he had taken to watching Noah more closely, his expression a mixture of pride and something that might have been fear. Now, as September's chill crept into the mountain nights, the Chen family settled into a new routine. Marco had built a more secure fence around their property, not to keep Noah in, he had explained to Lily, but to define a clear boundary for the bears and other wildlife that seemed increasingly drawn to their home. Today, Lily sat on the porch with a mug of hot tea, watching Noah arrange pine cones in intricate patterns on the newly fallen leaves. Her journal lay open beside her, the pages filled with observations of her son's continuing development. September 8th. Noah counted to 50 today without hesitation or error. When I asked who taught him, he said the trees told him about numbers. How many needles make a pine bunch? How many petals on different flowers? I don't know whether to be amazed or concerned by these invisible teachers. September 15th found Noah speaking to a young fox at the edge of the yard. He told me later that the fox's mother had been caught in a hunter's trap, likely the same one we freed earlier this summer. Noah seems to have appointed himself guardian to all orphaned creatures in the forest. September 21st. Noah asked me today why people cut down trees. When I explained about lumber for houses and paper, he became distressed. "Trees are people too," he insisted. "They talk and feel and help." I didn't know how to respond. Lily closed the journal as Noah approached the porch, his small hands cupped around something. At 20 months, he looked like any other toddler. Chubby cheeks flushed from the cool air, a mop of dark hair falling across his forehead, overalls smudged with dirt from his play. Only his eyes, those amber pools that seemed to hold wisdom far beyond his years, hinted at his true uniqueness. "Look, Mama," he said, opening his hands to reveal a tiny bird with brilliant blue feathers. The creature lay still, its eyes closed, one wing bent at an unnatural angle. Lily's heart sank. "Oh, Noah, I think it's—" "Not yet," Noah interrupted, his voice soft but certain. "Just sleeping too deep." Before Lily could stop him, Noah carried the bird to the spot where the black stone had been buried after the fire. He knelt and placed the tiny creature on the ground, then laid his palms flat on the earth beside it. His eyes closed in concentration, his lips moving in silent communication. After a moment, the soil beneath his hands began to glow with a faint, pulsing light. The same rhythm Lily had observed in the stone. The light spread, forming a small circle that encompassed both Noah's hands and the injured bird. "Noah," Lily whispered, transfixed, "what are you doing?" Her son didn't respond. His face was serene, focused entirely on his connection with the earth beneath his palms. The light grew stronger, and Lily could feel a strange vibration in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then, with a suddenness that made her gasp, the bird twitched. Its injured wings straightened, its eyes fluttered open, and it let out a faint chirp. Noah removed his hands from the ground, and the light faded, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. "Better now," Noah said simply, gently scooping up the bird. It sat in his palm, perfectly alert, its bright eyes regarding him with what Lily could only describe as recognition. After a moment, it spread its wings, both now whole and functional, and took flight, disappearing into the canopy of a nearby oak tree. Lily stared at her son, a tumult of emotions churning within her. Wonder at what she had witnessed, fear of its implications, and a growing certainty that Noah's connection to the natural world went far deeper than she had imagined. This was more than empathy or unusual intelligence. This was something ancient and powerful that seemed to flow through her son like a current. "Noah," she said carefully, "can you tell Mama what you just did?" Noah looked up at her, his expression innocent yet somehow ancient. "Stone helped," he said simply. "Stone underground, connects to everything." "And you can use that connection?" Noah nodded. "Stone shows me, trees show me, animals show me." He paused, struggling to explain concepts beyond his vocabulary. "Everything alive, everything connected, everything talks if you listen right." A chill ran down Lily's spine despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. Her son was describing a worldview that she, as a rational adult, had been conditioned to dismiss as fantasy or primitive superstition. Yet she had seen the bird's broken wing heal before her eyes. She had witnessed a rainstorm appear from nowhere to extinguish a wildfire. She had watched bears communicate with her child in ways that defied explanation. Does it scare you, Noah?" she asked softly. "Having these abilities?" Noah's brow furrowed in confusion. "Not abilities, Mama, just listening. Everyone can listen. Most forget how." Before Lily could respond, she heard the rumble of Marco's truck coming up the dirt road to the cabin. Noah's face lit up at the sound, and he ran to greet his father, the profound conversation apparently forgotten in his excitement. Lily remained on the porch, her thoughts in turmoil. What was she raising? A gifted child with an unusual affinity for nature, or something else entirely? And more importantly, how could she protect him in a world that feared what it couldn't understand? As Marco's truck appeared around the bend, Lily made a decision. She would continue to document Noah's abilities, but she would keep this knowledge within their family. The outside world wasn't ready for a child who could heal injured creatures with his touch, who could communicate with wild animals, who seemed connected to forces that most humans had forgotten or denied. For now, Pine Ridge Valley would be their sanctuary, a place where Noah could develop his extraordinary gifts away from curious eyes and skeptical minds. But a nagging worry persisted at the edges of her thoughts. How long could they keep such profound abilities hidden? And what would happen when the world inevitably discovered the miracle that was her son? October brought the first dusting of snow to the highest peaks surrounding Pine Ridge Valley. The forest blazed with autumn colors, and the air carried the sharp scent of pine and wood smoke. The Chen cabin, with its new coat of sealant on the exterior logs and its chimney now cleaned for the coming winter, stood ready to face the colder months ahead. Marco had taken on additional work with the Forest Service, helping to assess the damage from the summer's fire and to clear fallen trees before the heavy snows made the ridge inaccessible. This left Lily and Noah alone at the cabin for long stretches, and with each passing day, Noah's abilities seemed to grow stronger and more varied. It was on one such day, with Marco away since dawn and a light rain pattering against the cabin windows, that a knock came at the door. Lily froze, dish towel in hand, her eyes darting to Noah, who sat at the small kitchen table coloring pictures of animals with remarkable accuracy for a child not yet 2. They rarely received visitors. The cabin was miles from the nearest neighbor, and unexpected guests were virtually unheard of, especially in weather that threatened to worsen as the day progressed. The knock came again, more insistent this time. Lily approached the door cautiously, wishing suddenly that Marco kept his rifle closer to the entrance. "Who is it?" she called, her hand on the latch. "Forest Service, ma'am," came a deep voice from the other side. "Ranger Dawson, need to speak with you about some unusual animal activity in the area." Lily hesitated. She knew most of the rangers by name or sight, but Dawson wasn't familiar. Still, the Forest Service often rotated personnel, especially after incidents like the summer's fire. "Just a moment," she said, turning to whisper to Noah. "Stay here, sweetheart. Mama needs to talk to someone." But Noah was already shaking his head, his amber eyes wide with an emotion Lily had rarely seen in him. Fear. "No open door," he said urgently. "Bad man, not ranger." Lily's blood ran cold. In the months since the landslide, Noah's instincts had never been wrong. Not about the fire, not about injured animals, not about anything that threatened the delicate balance of their lives in Pine Ridge Valley. "Ma'am," the voice called again. "Everything all right in there?" "Fine," Lily replied, thinking quickly. "My son is napping. Can you come back when my husband is home? He should be here by evening." A pause, then. "Afraid this can't wait, ma'am. We've had reports of unusual bear behavior in this area. Potentially dangerous situation. Need to ask you some questions about any sightings you might have had." Lily's heartbeat quickened. This was exactly the kind of attention she had feared. Officials asking questions about the bears that seemed drawn to their property, about the strange relationship between those wild creatures and her son. "Noah," she whispered, "go to your room and stay there until I come get you." Noah shook his head again, more vigorously this time. "He wants stone, Mama. Feels stone power. Wants take." Lily stared at her son, a chill spreading through her chest. How could a stranger know about the stone? They had told no one about it. Not even Marco's parents when they had visited briefly in the summer. "Ma'am?" The handle of the door jiggled slightly as if being tested. "Need to come in now. Official Forest Service business." Noah slid from his chair and moved to Lily's side, his small hand slipping into hers. His touch sent a jolt through her. Not painful, but startling in its intensity. In that moment of connection, Lily experienced a flash of insight so vivid it was almost like seeing through her son's eyes. The man outside was not wearing a ranger's uniform, but dark clothing that seemed to absorb the light around it. His face was gaunt, with eyes that burned with an unnatural hunger, and he was not alone. 2 others waited in the trees beyond the yard, similarly dressed, similarly hungry. The vision faded as quickly as it had come, leaving Lily gasping. She squeezed Noah's hand, a silent acknowledgement of the warning he had shared, then backed away from the door, pulling him with her. "I'm sorry," she called, fighting to keep her voice steady. "We're not comfortable opening the door to strangers when my husband isn't home. If you leave your contact information, he can call you when he returns." A long silence followed, broken only by the soft pattering of rain on the roof. Then, in a voice that had lost all pretense of friendliness, the man said, "We know what you have here, Mrs. Chen. We know what your son can do. This can go easily or it can go hard. Your choice." Lily's mind raced. The phone was in the kitchen, but cell service was notoriously unreliable in the valley. Marco had the truck. The nearest neighbor was a 3-mile hike through dense forest. They were trapped. Or were they? A memory flashed through her mind. Willow rising on her hind legs, tapping 3 times against a tree trunk. Oak mimicking the gesture. The male bear following suit. A signal, a call for help. Noah seemed to read her thoughts. He moved to the window beside the door and pressed his palm against the glass. His lips moved in a silent communication, and the buried stone responded. A soft glow began to emanate from the earth in the yard, pulsing with that now familiar rhythm that seemed to connect her son to the forest and all its creatures. Outside, the man who had called himself Dawson cursed. Lily peered through a crack in the curtains and saw him backing away from the door, his face twisted in a mixture of fear and rage. He was indeed dressed in dark clothing rather than a ranger's uniform, and something metallic gleamed in his hand. A knife, or perhaps a small gun. "What did you do?" he shouted at the cabin. "What did you just do, boy?" Noah didn't respond. His hand remained pressed to the glass, his eyes closed in concentration. The glow from the buried stone grew stronger, spreading across the yard like ripples in a pond, illuminating the falling rain in an otherworldly light. Then came the sounds. Soft at first, then growing louder. Rustling in the underbrush. The crack of branches. The distinctive huffs and growls of bears, not 1 or 2 but many, moving through the forest toward the cabin. Lily watched in astonishment as shapes emerged from the trees, dark, powerful forms advancing through the rain. Willow and Oak were at the forefront, easily recognizable to her now, with the massive male close behind. But they were not alone. At least a dozen other bears followed, some black like Oak, others brown like his father, moving together with a purpose that defied natural behavior. The man called Dawson backed farther away from the door, shouting to unseen companions. 2 other figures broke cover from the trees at the edge of the yard, running toward a vehicle partially hidden on the forest track. But their escape route was cut off by 3 large bears that emerged from the underbrush directly in their path. What followed was a standoff that Lily would later struggle to describe in her journal. The bears made no move to attack the intruders, but formed a tight circle around them, cutting off all avenues of escape. Willow positioned herself directly in front of the cabin door, her massive body a living barrier between the strangers and the Chens. Oak and his father flanked her, their postures alert but controlled. The 3 men huddled together in the center of the circle, their faces pale with fear. The one called Dawson still held his weapon, but seemed to realize the futility of using it against so many powerful creatures. "Call them off!" he shouted at the cabin. "We just want to talk."